What's up, y'all? Talon here. Today I'm going to be going over the strongest Trick Room users in the Regulation H format. There's a lot of available Pokemon that can use Trick Room in the decks, but I figured I'd just go through some of the best ones, the ones you'll see most commonly, and then some of the more niche ones if you're playing in a GC Global Challenge, which is the best of one closed team sheet format that you'll be playing on cart for points. I figured I'll go over what some of the potential niches some of these Pokemon might have so you're not caught unawares. Starting off, these 4 Trick Room Pokemon are probably the most common you'll see on a composition called Hard Trick Room or Psy-Spam Trick Room, and basically the concept is to use the Indi Psychic Seed to go for really strong expanding forces with the Hatterene, or the Armarouge, or very strong Psycho Cuts with the Glade, but most commonly the Indi is going to be led with either the Hatterene, Armarouge, or Glade. Glade can be pretty common if you have a like a Goldengo or something, or anything that could threaten the Hatterene or Armarouge with spread type damage. You might see the Glade as a lead next to the Indi to go for Wide Guard plus Trick Room, and if you don't even lead the spread move, they can still pretty easily just go for the Follow Me plus the Trick Room option, which is going to be the most common option for the Hatterene and the Armarouge as well. If you do lead something that can't actually threaten a knockout onto the Indi, oftentimes they might go for a Trick Room on that and then attack with the partner, which can really put you behind in tempo for the battle, so definitely be careful of that. It's important to have some strategies coming into these, basically the Indi plus Trick Room setter lead, just in your team building in general. One thing I didn't mention about the Indi is oftentimes they'll actually have Helping Hand. If Trick Room does go up, they can boost up the expanding forces or dazzling gleams of the Indi or the Hatterene. The Hatterene can also run Mystical Fire if you lead something like a Goldengo and they didn't lead Glade. Don't think that you just have a free Make It Rain. Oftentimes they will just go for Terra Fire, Follow Me away the partner's attack, and then tank the Make It Rain and set up Trick Room and be threatening with a Mystical Fire KO the next turn. They're often Life Orb. You can see Twisted Spoon on this, but typically it's going to be Life Orb to boost the power of its other moves as well. And yeah, Hatterene, probably the most common over Armarouge. We'll see how the metagame develops, but because these teams typically have a Torkoal on them as well, having something like a Armarouge's Armor Cannon coverage can be a little unnecessary, but the value of Meteor Beam is definitely appreciated as well. Armarouge also can run the Wide Guard move, so definitely be wary of that. Check your team sheet if you're playing in a open team sheet format to see if they are the Trick Room Wide Guard or the Trick Room Meteor Beam. The way that plays against Incineroar and other Pokemon in general is very different, so got to be on the lookout for that. Moving on to Glade, there's actually a lot of different ways you can run the Glade. Typically it's going to be Terra Grass, but I've also seen Terra Fire as just a resistance to Goldengo, as well as Will-O-Wisp from Incineroar. Typically it'll be Clear Amulet with Sacred Sword. Basically that's going to be a one-hit knockout onto the Incineroars with Sharpness. The Sharpness boost is really effective for both its Psycho Cuts, sometimes Leaf Blades, Night Slashes, and Sacred Swords, giving it basically a Choice Band boost, which really increases the damage output. Oftentimes I have seen a Razor Claw on the Glade or a Scope Lens. It does the same effect, but it basically gives the Psycho Cut, Night Slash, and Leaf Blade a 50% chance to crit. In Psychic Terrain, that means your Psycho Cuts are just going to do crazy damage and basically have a chance to cut through a Dondozo a little more effectively than Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword, if they're leftovers, is not going to be efficiently KOing them. They can basically go for a Protect if Glade is the only Pokemon outputting damage. Usually that won't be the case, but note that Dondozo will survive a Sacred Sword with, I think it'll take like 50 to 60%, but with leftovers for the first turn, and then Protect it to live the next one. So you really do need another Pokemon to provide Helping Hand support or another chip attack to knock it out. But basically with Razor Claw, you can just go for Psycho Cut twice, and I think the rule works out that if you crit one of the Psycho Cuts, you have a pretty good chance to knock out, but you do still, more consistent is the Sacred Sword set, in my opinion, with the Clear Amulet, whereas the crit set can be a little cuter against Dondozo, but a little bit more variance there. This next Trick Room setter is a Oranguru. I haven't seen a lot of this Pokemon, but I do think it's pretty strong in this meta just because the power level is pretty low, and although its bulk is pretty good, 90, 80, 110 isn't that bulky, and it can't usually withstand pressure in restricted formats, but in a limited one like this, where the strongest Pokemon won't necessarily be able to knock it out that easily without committing a Terra, I think it's pretty good. Inner Focus is its most common ability just because it offers immunity to basically Fake Out flinching as well as Rock Slide flinching. That's definitely not negligible. And if you run a Mental Herb or a Safety Goggles, you can get rid of other people's most common Trick Room counterplay. Mental Herb for Taunt, and then Safety Goggles for Spore or other sleep moves from Sleep Powders. Like, it's really mainly for Amoonguss, but Safety Goggles allows you to instruct your partner around the Amoonguss's Rage Powder as well as not be spored yourself, so that's definitely very appreciated. But the focus of the Oranguru is typically just going to be to instruct a very powerful spread type attacker like a Torkoal. I've also seen you can run Telepathy with like an Explosion Golem or something like that. The Alolan Golem's Galvanized Explosion, definitely very strong. Typically we'll see that a bit more with Rabasca, which also has Telepathy, as well as having Revival Blessing to go for 2 explosions in one battle, but getting ahead of myself there. Typically it's going to be with the Torkoal, just trying to go for really strong spread type attacks, but it could be with another strong attacker as well. Next Pokemon I want to talk about is Porygon 2. So Porygon 2 is generally going to be on a bit more balanced of a composition. Right now we're seeing a lot with Incineroar, Amoonguss, and either Primarina or Ursaluna or both. Typically these are going to be very setup focused teams. It could be a substitute or a Swords Dance Ursaluna, but the idea behind these teams is to use the immense bulk and pivotability of P2, Incineroar, and Amoonguss, as well as the bulk of Ursaluna and Primarina, to get and utilize multiple turns of Trick Room, or basically multiple setups. So you'll be setting up Trick Room more than once during the battle and try and win the battle over the course of 2 Trick Rooms, and just really pressure your opponent through slow balance play with really bulky Pokemon. It's definitely something that's hard to play if you're a beginner, but it can be, basically the power of this strategy can be brought out by really experienced players who just can understand the positioning on the battlefield a little bit better. The set for the Porygon is typically going to be Terra Blast, Ice Beam, Recover, and Trick Room. You could see Thunderbolt, I guess, over Ice Beam, but oftentimes the Terra Blast, you'll pretty much always see Terra Blast because it takes advantage of download really well. If you EV your Porygon 2 right, you can take advantage of the attack boost from download or the special attack boost, which is pretty cool. And then depending on the Porygon 2's Terra type, you can basically tailor that to specific matchups. I've seen Fairy to deal with fighting type Pokemon pretty well, Flying to partner with an Ursaluna's Earthquake and also deal with flying types a little bit better than Ice Beam would. And yeah, just a overall pretty versatile Pokemon with a lot of bulk. With Recover, if you take damage during the Trick Room setup, you can recover, get back to full during the Trick Room, and then set it up multiple times throughout the battle as mentioned. This next Pokemon, Sinistra, is probably the last Trick Room setter that I expect to be really strong on a lot of teams. I think these other ones might be a little more best of one, or like very specific to one combination or duo of Pokemon, but I do think Sinistra has really broad applications this metagame. The Hospitality, definitely very appreciated. We're seeing a lot of setup in the meta, and because of that, the Hospitality giving 25% to HP healing to potentially a setup Pokemon is definitely very appreciated. We've seen Life Dew as well under Trick Room conditions as another way to heal like setup Pokemon, so I like that. Rage Powder for additional setup, basically redirecting attention to the Sinistra, and then Trick Room as the last main option. Usually we'll see Matcha Gotcha, but I could see Strength Sap over one of these options to increase the longevity of the Sinistra to function more like a Porygon 2, where you can set up Trick Room and then heal up back to full with Strength Sap. The healing on this move is actually pretty absurd, but yeah, generally the Sinistra is going to be on more setup-oriented Trick Room teams, where you might lead a Follow Me Pokemon or Fake Out Pokemon plus your setup Pokemon that appreciates being in Trick Room but might not necessarily need it, but just really likes the Hospitality healing. I do like experimenting with Sinistra early on in this format, just because it feels like Spore is a little less effective on Amoonguss than it has been in the past. So having a passive healing in the Hospitality, as well as an active healing in Life Dew, might make it a little bit stronger than the Amoonguss's Pollen Puff, at least in the context of supporting setup Pokemon. The next Pokemon I want to talk about is Dusclops. So Dusclops' damage output is really, really bad. Like, offensive stats is obviously pretty weak, but with the Eviolite item, the bulk gets pretty crazy. In a best of one format, I really like Frisk. Just like in a global challenge, you can figure out what opponents' items are on lead, and that can be really go a long way. Like if you have for some reason Spore, Sleep Powder on the team, you can see if anything has safety goggles, sniff out any choice spexes or otherwise problematic items. But the main value of Dusclops, in my opinion, is the combination of Trick Room and either Will-O-Wisp or Haze. So Haze is going to serve as a really effective move to use next to, or really against Dondozo, as well as pretty strong against Intimidate. Like if you have an Ursaluna and someone's trying to switch in Incineroar to deal with it, you can Haze before the Ursaluna moves and get rid of that Intimidate. That's pretty cool. As well as like if you have a Draco Meteor Pokemon on your team, you can Haze away those drops. That's awesome. And then Will-O-Wisp, just generally strong utility, weakening physical attackers like King Gambit or something like that. And then outside of that, for damage, you'll often have Pain Split as healing and damage, or Nightshade. Sometimes over one of these moves, I'd imagine Haze is a little more common than Will-O-Wisp here. You might see Pain Split dropped for Nightshade, and then this set just be this. The 3 support moves and Nightshade is just a little bit of passive chip into your opponents. But yeah, I do think overall Dusclops might not be as consistent. Like if you face an Incineroar, it's kind of a problem if they knock you out on lead, but in a best of one environment, it could be cool. Like I can imagine someone running a Shadow Sneak Dusclops with a cheeky Terra, like a weakness policy Pokemon. You have Frisk. This is basically a strong best of one strategy where you can go for the Frisk to figure out your opponent's items, and then you have the information advantage definitely with the Shadow Sneak Weakness Policy combo. You know what items they have. They probably don't have an idea of what your strategy is going to be, so that could be cool in a closed team sheet format as well. Now, Gothel is a Pokemon that usually isn't especially strong early format, but can kind of become very strong and like centralize some teams later on, especially in regional dex formats. I don't think the Politoed Perish Trap option is going to be as strong as it usually is, but Gothel's ability to just trap Pokemon in the field if you're leading correctly can be really, really difficult to deal with, especially when it has Helping Hand and Fake Out. So like imagine you have a team that really forces 50-50s on whether you're going to lead with Gothel Typhlosion or some other option that beats Gothel Typhlosion. That can be really advantageous, especially when you have the information or the experience advantage playing a composition like that. So I do think Gothel is going to be pretty solid on a couple teams this format, but might not be a metagame mainstay like a couple of the other Pokemon on the list. Farigiraf is a Pokemon that I think a lot of people had high hopes for coming into this regulation. It hasn't been that strong thus far. I think the value of Fake Out blocking in particular is a little worse when the partner Pokemon isn't a Calyrex Shadow, Calyrex Ice, or just, a Miraidon that can one-hit KO you and kind of make up for the lacking offense on Farigiraf's side. I think Farigiraf Blood Moon is the option that a lot of people are leaning towards early format and are still trying to lean on, but I'm not sure if that is as strong as it was in the past. We will see. I think it's a fundamentally pretty strong Pokemon with a great ability, so we'll see if the metagame is a little kinder toward it in the middle and late stages of Regulation H. Bruxish is a Pokemon that I don't think is very good, but it definitely had a big performance at the World Championship in 2023, or rather there was a lot of players who had a very cool build with Aqua Jet, Dazzling, Trick Room Bruxish with a Follow Me lead, and you would let the Follow Me lead go down. They can't priority away your Follow Me, and they can basically just go for Trick Room plus Aqua Jet into a Weakness Policy Torkoal or similar type of strategies and just go crazy that way. I'm not sure if this particular strategy is going to work out that well again. I think it could be kind of weak to things like Tyranitar or anything similar, but yeah, definitely be on the lookout if you see a Bruxish. Potentially could be an Aqua Jet setup or a Trick Room Pokemon. Now we're starting to get pretty niche, but I think Slowking is a potential Trick Room Pokemon. A lot of the Pokemon on the list outside of Bruxish, I guess, don't resist Make It Rain naturally, which can be a solid Trick Room answer, or at least put a dent in your Trick Room Pokemon before you can even get it set up. Slowking's kind of interesting. It gets Trick Room. Oblivious is an ability that makes it immune to taunts. You can run like Safety Goggles. And then if you had Indi on the field with Safety Goggles Oblivious, you'd be immune to Spore, Taunt, and one of the more common, also Fake Out. You wouldn't be able to get Fake Outed. You could also run Expanding Force. This would be a pretty solid utility set. We saw Slowking get pretty deep into the World Championship this year. So a Pokemon that's kind of on my radar. You can also run Regenerator with Chilly Reception to set up Snow and then switch out. Maybe you have like an Abomasnow in the back, or like a Glaceon that you want to go for. That seems a little more gimmicky. I'd imagine you're just running Flamethrower over this, but definitely something to be on the lookout for if you see a potential Blizzard spamming Pokemon. Medicham is another niche one, but does have a cool combination of Fake Out and Trick Room, as well as Skill Swap. So if you have if you're able to get Trick Room up any kind of way, whether you're using Fake Out to do it with the Medicham or the partner is, and you get a Skill Swap into something like probably not Ursaluna because of the Guts, like you want to keep Guts on that, but there's a whole lot of very strong offensive Pokemon that would love the Pure Power. Tyranitar comes to mind, but I'm sure there could be several others. But yeah, Medicham generally going to be a Trick Room skill swap guy to give your strong physical attackers the Pure Power ability and double their attack stat. Now we have Indi, the male form, and it does look very angry, and that's because it does not actually like going into Trick Room itself. So this is kind of like an imprisoned Trick Room Pokemon where if you're using a hyper offensive Tailwind team and you just want to slap on a Pokemon that can basically cover your Trick Room matchup, you can use Imprison to block the Expanding Force damage output and Dazzling Gleam from the Hatterene. They can't go for Trick Room as well. That's definitely a really strong strategy. It also can go into Trick Room if your opponent is trying to match your Tailwind. Like if you can lead the Indeedee and another Pokemon that is slower than their really fast Pokemon, you can set up Trick Room that way, and that can be an effective strategy. I do like Indeedee as both a Trick Room setter, anti-Trick Room Pokemon, and self-sufficient spread type sweeper with the Expanding Force Twisted Spoon and the Psychic Surge. So overall a Pokemon that I think is maybe being a little bit underrated right now. Now we go into Bronzong, which is kind of a interesting Trick Room setter where its main value is its strong defensive bulk, but once you get a couple Iron defenses up during Trick Room, it can actually become a sweeper on its own right with Body Press. I'm not sure how strong this is going to be in the metagame. I think Goldengo definitely poses a difficult challenge for it, but it does also do pretty well into some other Pokemon in the metagame. Like being able to Body Press and knock out King Gambit's pretty cool, and overall just being a combo setup sweeper, and Trick Room Setter is a unique aspect of it. Now we have Wordeer, which I don't actually expect to be very good, but I guess you can go skill swap Trick Room to go for multiple Intimidates in a battle if you want to get rid of the ability on your partner Pokemon, or honestly, if you have a Defiant Pokemon like Annihilate or King Gambit in your own Trick Room, you can skill swap your opponent, give them Intimidate, and then it'll activate your own Defiant ability and boost them up. That can be kind of cool. But overall, yeah, not going to be that common. I think the problem is Normal Psychic is kind of a dense type for Trick Room Setters. We have a Rangaroo, which offers Instruct, which is probably a little bit more consistent than any skill swap stuff you could do with Wordeer. The damage output isn't that crazy from its 105 special attack and attacking stat, and the Fergraph is probably just a better utility special attacker, especially with Armor Tail as a, situationally for Trick Room, stronger ability than Intimidate. Not going to say Intimidate is bad, but on Trick Room teams, generally the priority blocking is a little more valuable here. Rapsa is definitely a best of one type of Pokemon you'll see a lot of the time on best of one Pokemon Showdown ladder or on the battle staging ladder, but the value of it is typically going to be the Telepathy ability, which means you can Earthquake, Discharge, any spread type attack that hits your partner, it will ignore that damage. Notably, this works really well with Explosion Pokemon. You can go Explosion Metagross or Explosion Galvanize Alolan Golem, and that'll do a lot of damage to your opponents, and then you can kind of just revive the Explosion Pokemon later in the battle to go for it again. So definitely a Pokemon I'm not really expecting to do great, but worth being on your radar. Next up is Mimikyu, which has a niche for sure. The Disguise ability with a Follow Me Pokemon is typically pretty strong at getting Trick Room up consistently. Mental Herb or Safety Goggles is going to be your choice to block either Taunt or Safety Goggles, depending on which is a bigger problem for your team. I think Curse can be a kind of cool option on a Mimikyu to basically just curse a Dondozo. You sacrifice 50% of your HP for their Dondozo, 25% of theirs every turn, which is a pretty valuable trade in my opinion in a lot of circumstances. So I think Mimikyu definitely a Pokemon that we could see. It's had some usage early on in Regulation A, and it didn't really carry on in other formats, but could be its time to shine here. Koffei is definitely the supporter of choice of a lot of setup Pokemon, especially ones that tend to take a lot of damage before they basically get the setup. So thinking things like Como, Belly Drum Sweepers like Snorlax could definitely be an example of this, but it is competing pretty hard against Sinistra in my opinion, which although can't go for the immediate damage of Floral Healing or the immediate healing, can go for Life Dew. The Hospitality on switch in makes you a little bit more flexible than needing to get the Comfy in and like go for Protect, get the Comfy in safely and then go for Floral Healing. Although the payoff is a lot better, it can be kind of hard to make that happen. It is priority. I didn't have Triage active actually, but yeah, the Pokemon's healing moves have their priority increased by 3. This is actually higher than, or I think it might be on the same priority bracket as Fake Out, which is pretty cool. So if you outspeed a Fake Out Pokemon, you can still get the Floral Healing off, or even the Draining Kiss. Draining Kiss plus a Weakness Policy Pokemon, definitely something to be on the lookout, especially with the ability to get past Fake Out. With the priority on the Triage, that can be a cool option as well as a good option to basically hit a Prankster Pokemon down to their Focus Sash and then knock them out with the Draining Kiss before they can even go for the accompanying move, like a priority Taunt or something like that. So that's going to do it for the strongest Trick Room Setters coming into the Regulation H format, in my opinion. We're very early on in the format, so it's very possible I have overlooked something. Let me know if there are any Trick Room Setters you think could do well outside of this list in the comments below. If you enjoy this type of video, please subscribe, give the video a like, and with all that being said, peace y'all.